Okay, so here's a rundown of the key points from Quiz 5. So the first question about inheritance, this is something that Pomeroy discusses in her chapter. The main idea here is that inheritance does actually go through the woman even when there isn't a husband to bring about succession directly to her son. So even though the woman is an agent of this and not able to control it, it's not solely exclusive of her. She's attached to the household. What ends up happening is if there's a widow and there isn't a son from that family to inherit, the inheritance goes through the woman. She ends up needing to marry the next of kin, essentially, and the succession is perpetuated that way. And so, whoever is the eldest male available brings about the legal requirement for there to be a male to perpetuate the succession. In terms of the second question, so the point of this question is to talk about the bias that is endemic to scholarship about gender and antiquity, and particularly in Athens. And this is one of the reasons why Pomeroy is writing this book, why she becomes a scholar, because she wants to address the problem of men writing about history from the male point of view and seeing the things that they want to see. And so there are a number of different points of view. The long-standing point of view was that all women were secluded. They had no rights. They had no voice. They were kept in suppression. And this is what Victorian historians wanted to see and what they reinforced in their writings. And this continued into the 20th century. And later, there's a reaction to this and looking for how all of that is wrong and writing about how women in Athens actually had agency and so forth. And then there's a third position reacts to that. That talks about, even if there is seclusion, the secluded women are still respected and dominant within the household, emphasizing that seclusion is primarily a means of protection. All of this is to say that historians are reacting to each other, and the consensus view shifts from generation to generation, and has to do with the impact and reaction of previous scholarship. What Pomeroy is talking about here is the need to go back to the sources themselves and to bring about fresh interpretation that is objective as possible, and to remember that it shifts according to class and period and place. A lot of these, sweeping generalizations that historians are prone to about women in antiquity in general, especially in terms of Athens. Pomeroy is trying very hard to make the case, that it is overgeneralization and leaves behind the women that don't apply to these situations. It leaves behind the volatility of how things transform, especially in Athens. Athens is a place of constant transformation during the Archaic and Classical period. This is true in terms of gender as well as in terms of class, in terms of social construct. Athens is constantly changing. So the need to understand the condition of women is to talk about what it is like amongst the nobility, what it is like amongst the middle and lower citizen classes, what it is like amongst the non-citizen classes, and to talk about that in terms of Athens, as opposed to Thebes, as opposed to Corinth, as opposed to Sparta, to talk about that in terms of the time of the Peloponnesian War versus the time of the Persian War versus the 6th century and 7th century. The Athens is in flux, and Athens is made up of a very vast and complex society. And so talking about gender in Athens doesn't have one simple answer. The multiple choice question, the answer is the joke answer, which is the spaghetti terrace, which is the spaghetti monster. The point of this question is to emphasize that women had a number of different religious outlets in which they could, which their participation is both valuable to them in terms of identity and bears a very strong responsibility for holding up their side of Athenian culture in terms of the benevolence of the gods. And so there are a number of different ways in which women collectively have strength and agency and responsibility in terms of their role with the Greek religion. And finally, in terms of Humanities, so we'll talk about this in the discussion, but and there are a number of things you can talk about in terms of how the actions of the fates and how brutally single-minded they are, the judgments of the citizens, the intervention of Athena, the things that Apollo says versus what Athena says. The thing that I want to emphasize here is that Eumenides gets across a sense that the gods have their own agendas. So the Furies are attacking Orestes because of very specific act, and their function is to perform their abuse and persecution of Orestes, regardless of all of their considerations. And this includes the fact that Orestes was ordered to kill Clytemnestra by Apollo. So the Furies represent this very focused and an almost irrational purpose that all of the gods have. All the gods represent a particular concept and a particular force of nature, and the Furies are an extreme form of that, but it's represented the fact that all the gods are like this. And when we see Apollo is the sort of the next generation. He represents the Olympian gods, which are capable of reason and debate, but they are not grounded in human morality. They are not bound by what is right or wrong. The gods act according to what it is that that is natural for them, and their own conceits and their own caprice. And so Apollo takes a position that is not in terms of justice for Orestes, but in terms of his own his own needs. And even Athena, who represents wisdom, still takes a very personal and subjective point of view. And so the result of this is, what is Aeschylus saying? Aeschylus is saying that we cannot rely upon the gods for justice, that we need to shift from justice being dispensed by the gods, as represented by the Furies, and Apollo and Athena not being able to agree. We need to shift from justice being dispensed by the gods, and take justice into our own hands. And so this is one of the things that's going on here. Now, one of the things that this represents is that justice is now in the hands of men in terms of mortal male citizens, rather than being in the hands of gods that are dispersed amongst male and female. So the gender side of this is that the agency of the gods is distributed across male and female gods. The agency of Athenians is distributed across the male citizens.